today. As so many of you know, the CDC is really primarily an advocacy organization. We fight and help patients fight for better laws and policies that help in healthcare. And when we're successful, we help level the playing field for all chronic disease patients. And, as part of our work, our whole staff thinks really daily about the patient experience in the healthcare system. But it's going to be the holidays, and we want to focus on things a little closer to home. These dark times of years when we really appreciate how interconnected and interdependent we all are. This month also is National Caregivers Month, and it just seems exactly the right time to be invited into the lives of patients and their families to talk about the day-to-day work of caregiving. So whether you're a patient who needs help, a caregiver who can give it or already does, or even if you're a few steps outside that immediate need, and you want to know how to support the people who are doing the day-to-day caregiving, I think that there's a lot to learn from and be inspired by. If this is something that you or your family is going through, even or especially if you're a caregiver yourself, we also just really want to acknowledge the intensity of that emotional experience. The New York Times has some great coverage this month about what's happening for caregivers and gives a lot of different insights, both on the political battles and on the internal and personal battles. And we'll talk more about other resources that families can get. And now just a little bit of housekeeping, because this is going to be a conversation amongst all of the panelists, and we want this to be a conversation with you too. So please feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function to ask questions. We'll answer them midstream if we can, but we'll also have time at the end to take them up. And we're happy to have them. And if things come up that we can't answer in the moment, we will get the answer to you. And so with that, I would like to get out of the way and invite our panelists to introduce themselves and tell their story so that you know a little bit about the journey that they're on. And I'll call on folks according to who's on my screen. Christina, why don't you go first?
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm a patient ambassador for the CDC and have a rare disease. I'll be presenting not only on my experience with needing a caregiver, a family caregiver, and also my professional caregivers, but also, let's see, I'm drawing a blank. Also, my hospital administration background and the things that patients and family caregivers can do to engage the healthcare system.
That's great. Thank you. Polly, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am the mom of 3 boys, and all 3 of mine have a rare disease. They're all on growth hormone shots, and it's been kind of a process to get all of them diagnosed and started on that and keep going on that. So yeah, it keeps me busy.
I bet. Yadira.
It's a pleasure to be speaking with you all. So I'll start with a little bit more of a personal. My career in health is really motivated by my and my family's background as Mexican immigrants accessing and navigating the healthcare system here when we first came to this country. And I'm also Chicago-based, so also dealing and working, navigating the different healthcare systems within Chicago. So from a very young age, I was helping my parents navigate, like I said, the healthcare system, anything from interpreting, coordinating, advocating for them, since something that I still do today. And so I don't consider myself an active caregiver, but I know that caregiving is in my future due to my parents' financial situation, as well as it is a cultural expectation. And so in terms of my professional experience, my background is in public health, and I've held different jobs throughout different sectors, philanthropy, healthcare, nonprofit. And right now I am the director of programs at the National Alliance for Caregiving. And so I started with my personal story because, that upbringing of that, my experience as being bilingual, bicultural really shaped kind of how I do this work and why I do this work, and just this knowledge of systemic injustices, but also the strength that communities have into this aging and caregiving space.
Thank you. That's great context. Crystal, glad to see you again.
Wonderful to see you as well, and thank you for welcoming. My name's Crystal Barrett O'Loughlin. I founded an organization back in the year 2000 called Angel Aid, and we provide mental health and well-being services for rare, chronic, and complex disease families. So we work with often young adult and adult patients, as well as the concentric circles of caregiver support, whether that be parents or spouses. And more, we've found ourselves also working with healthcare professionals and patient advocacy leaders and others that are supporting rare, chronic, and complex disease families. So examples of support services include free weekly support groups, quarterly wellness retreats that we may offer either in a virtual format or in person at our wellness center in Orange County, California. And then we run a coalition called the Rare Givers Coalition. This is an organization of stakeholders, really hearts, individuals within various different pharmaceutical companies, within hospital networks, within patient advocacy organizations that feel very strongly that we need to start with feelings first in our conversations, that there's a propensity to want to fix the difficult medical situations that we're in and just go straight into conversation about symptom management, treatments, cures, clinical trials, and others. And it really is our belief system that we need to look holistically at the emotional impact on the individual of receiving that diagnosis or trying to receive that diagnosis. And then if we can start with feelings first, if we can start with conversations about the grief cycles, even if you're not grieving an end of life experience, you may be grieving what you thought life was going to look like, either your own or in your loved one. If we can start conversations at the heart first, we're all going to have a much more sustainable system of support for families around the world. So that's our thinking.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely talk a little bit more about what those services and that day-to-day work looks like. Christina, I was wondering if you could first maybe talk a little bit about the kind of care that your daughter, and tell us a little bit about her, gives you, and then maybe tie it into how we can utilize the healthcare system in as much as it is to support them and support us.
Well, I had a 7.5 month delay in my diagnosis. So for my caregiving needs started before I even got treatment and a diagnosis. And my daughter was a high school student at the time. She was the one who, came home after school and would help me until my husband came home. So she had an important role. And one of the things that I needed to do that I did back when I worked was I advocated for myself, and I told her what I needed. I couldn't open baggies. I didn't have hand strength. I didn't have, I could not do nimble movements. So, I would say, I need you to help me with this, and this is why I need you to help me with it. And I did the same thing with my husband, sort of helping guide them with the things that I could no longer do. I also sent them, I found some videos on the internet from some of the organizations that I suspected my condition was from. And when I was diagnosed, I sent them even more. But I sent them videos that explained what was going on with me, and why I was falling, and why I was taking 3-hour naps. And that really helped them understand and also help them understand how they could help me better. In the process, my daughter learned to be more of an advocate, not only for me within the family, but also for herself and her own healthcare needs going forward. So she has more confidence now to speak up when she needs help. As far as the professional side of my world, I started working in hospitals as a teenager. I was a volunteer first and then got jobs, and my career lasted over 40 years. One of the things that I learned very quickly, because I was young and I didn't realize I was supposed to point out when doctors were wrong, was I would sit them down and have them understand what the process was and how both of us fit into that process, so that together we could be more effective. I could meet their needs if I had what I needed from them. And then I carried that with me through my interactions with patients, helping mediate sometimes between patients and the professional caregivers. You know, I would get the complaints as an administrator and then work between the patient, the nurses, the doctors, the therapists to help facilitate that process. One of the things that happened along the way was Joint Commission, which is an accrediting organization, realized the importance of the role of caregivers and advocacy, self-advocacy, and they released a lot of resources, both for the healthcare professionals. So hospitals and other organizations are accredited by this organization, and they're surveyed to ensure that they are meeting the needs of their patients. But they also have resources for patients so that they can better advocate for themselves. And that program is referred to as Speak Up. And there's going to be a link in the chat box so that you could check out maybe some of those videos. Let's see if there was anything. I think from the answer of the healthcare system, our healthcare leaders and professionals need to do a better job at listening to us, but we also need to do a better job in specifying our needs and expectations and speaking up for ourselves. Every patient is different, and we need to explain why we're different from whatever other diabetic patient that they've been seeing for years. And complex care came up by someone. There are people who have multiple conditions, and each of those adds to their functioning and inabilities. So that's why that speaking up as to why we're different is important.
You were lucky in some ways that you were able to train your own caregivers on what they needed. Like, you knew what resources that would help them. And that's a great thing. I think that's one of the strengths of the disease groups too, is that they can help identify, you know, when you partner with a disease group, help you identify those kinds of things that help the caregivers get up to speed on that. Polly, I want to go to you. Parenting is already so much about caregiving, but parenting for kids who are struggling for a diagnosis, and then there's treatment and they want to live their lives, is also really complex. So could you explain a little bit how your life is different than maybe that of other parents of kids your kids' age?
I think one way it's different. My kids, they've now, some of them moved to weekly shots, but we were on daily shots, and that's just a challenge in and of itself. They have regular meds and doing the shots. The shots are just kind of a bigger deal than taking a pill. And so that's definitely different than having a kid that just is carefree and doesn't have to do that every day, and you don't have to have that battle every night. And so I think that's hard. And if my kids want to spend the night out or go to camp, there's just always accommodations I have to make for them to be able to do those things. And then appointments, we live about an hour and a half from the specialist that my kids see. So when we have those appointments, we have to take the day off school to travel to a bigger city to see the doctors. And most kids get to see a pediatrician in town, but we have to go to a specialist in a bigger city, which isn't all bad because we do kind of have fun and take the day off and do fun things. But it is a day off school, and we have to make up for that work. So I think those are just some different things that, most things you can get met by an average pediatrician and they're great at most things, but then when you need a specialist, it just takes a little bit more effort and getting there and getting it all approved and dealing with that. Their medicine has to be overnighted to us on ice. And so a huge pain is we have to be home to sign for it. And I cannot stand sitting around waiting for UPS. So it now goes to the grandparents' house, but I digress. So there's just little things that you don't even think about, but it adds up. All these little things they add up to be a lot that are just not there for an average kid. So yeah.
It's a lot of logistics that people don't anticipate as part of caregiving.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, the less rewarding things like waiting for UPS. That sounds not what you need in any given day. You dear talk. Could you talk a little bit about the National Alliance for Caregiving and how you see your work supporting, patients like Christina and parents like Polly?
Sure. But before I respond, I just want to just really lift up what Christina shared about the self-advocacy that she had to take on as the person being cared for, and then as the caregivers, and then of course what Polly shared about like all of the caregiving tasks that caregivers take on, including medical and nursing tasks. I think that it is the coordination, it is the medical and nursing tasks, and those are really take a lot of time. And what we've learned is that the caregivers do them, out of love, do them out of, a sense of duty and, for a want to help out, but that our systems need to be better for caregivers so that they can, so they can perform those roles and those tasks. And a bit of a side note, and I hope that it's okay, but I think given my kind of personal background and experience, like this conversation brought up a book that I think about often called The Spirit Catches You and Then You Fall Down. And it is about a Vietnamese Hmong family who is taking its parents who are trying to who are taking care of their daughter who has epilepsy, and just the miscommunication around providers and the family, because it's all of these things, the caregiving, it's the coordination, the communication, but there's also a lot of like language and cultural nuance in there. So just giving it a shout out. It's one of the books that I read decades ago and still think about it often because it's
I'm going to put a link in the chat because it is one of my probably top 5 most important healthcare books to really understand both the strengths of the system and our incredible weaknesses and biases that screw everything up. It's a complex story, but a good one. I'm glad you mentioned it. Crystal, you I'm sorry. So let's get back to the National Alliance for Caregiving. I'll put
yes,
in the top, but then I'm going to bounce to Crystal.
I'll do it quick. The National Alliance for Caregiving is a membership organization. We've been around since 1996, and we're focused on catalyzing system change to build health, wealth, and equity for family caregivers. Our members include a mix of nonprofit and corporate entities, and our work falls into 3 large buckets: do advocacy, research, and program innovation. And I'll let you turn it over to the next question.
That's great. Crystal, one of and I know you're so good at going off script too, but we've got lots of individual perspectives, but your organization really has looked across the board to see what are sort of the common struggles. So could you talk a little bit about your organization, obviously, and also sort of what you see as thematically true across all these different kinds of populations?
Yes. So, we all have our personal family experiences, and we bring those into the work that we do. And what drives me every day is growing up as a little sister. 3 of my 4 older brothers were born with a rare genetic disease called Hunter syndrome. And it caused these sort of chronic conditions that we, as a family, we all organized around the care of my brothers, and they passed away at 12, 18, and 19 years old in the 1980s. So I've sort of have this lived experience, but what I started realizing over the years is that the data shows how important it is that we tend to our emotional connectedness, even as these medical experiences are happening to us. And there's an amazing article in Psychology Today that talks about the different kinds of support that we both receive and is offered to us. And disease management support, information about symptoms, information about sort of the tangible side of things, about how to get insurance claims covered, how to get yourself into a clinical trial, how to get to the right specialist. That's like the triage list. That's the left brain triage list of things that have to be done in order to manage these medicalized lives, whether you're managing it for yourself as a patient or you're doing it for your loved one, either a child or perhaps you're a spouse, a care partner, for an adult. So that triage list of what has to be done is anxiety inducing, right? That there isn't a lot of emotional relief that comes out, like, yeah, you might be able to get that form submitted, or you might have a big win, you got coverage for something, or you got the appointment that you needed. But what data has shown and research has shown is that the emotional relief that comes from being witnessed, that comes from being asked, how do you feel about this experience that you're living through? When you're sitting across from a person that's giving you an empathetic response, whether that's a social worker, your doctor, or even a family member, but someone that really is just asking you, can we just talk about your feelings about this? Are you mad? Are you angry? Are you happy? Are you frustrated? Or, what are your feelings about it? It's such a relief when you get to unburden, those feelings out of your own psyche. And the other thing that we know that brings relief, emotional relief, is companionship. So being in community with people that are going through the same experience, or that maybe not exactly the same experience, but are going through something similar, that those support groups and those support networks are so, so important. And there aren't enough therapists for us to, all be in one-on-one therapy. So by default, we need to be seeking out like peer support and working with each other. And I don't mean the kind of peer support where you come in and you start like, going back and forth about your symptom management and all the terrible things that are happening. It's peer support about how you're dealing, how are you coping emotionally? What are the positive, habitual kind of rituals that you're bringing into your day-to-day life to blow off steam, whether you're exercising or, are you taking a few moments to brew your goddess coffee in the morning, or what are you doing to kind of mindfully ground yourself in gratitude in those few moments where things are going right? How do we kind of bring ourselves back to that? So that's what we've put into practice, both in our methodologies, but in our opportunities to connect, is through creating space for those moments to just be witnessed in your feelings about what's happening, and also do it in an environment where people get it in the first couple of minutes.
I'm so glad you talk about
nodding, right? Yeah, Christina's like, yes,
exactly.
I need more of that. Yes, please. Where is that? Come over to Angel Aid, angelaidcares.org. Look it up, events, you can join anytime.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that New York Times piece does well too is articulate some of that, of just, the intense anger, and you're not angry at your person, you're angry at the situation and the lack of support there is, for people who are managing this. And there's so much talk about, self-care these days, but half the time it's being, used to sell bubble bath. And this is not that. right? This is a whole different level. You're fighting, you're fighting burnout, you're fighting anxiety, you're fighting fatigue and depression and stress. And so, I'd love to hear from Polly. How do you manage that? How do you ask your friends and family to help you manage that?
I'm not the best. I
No, it
probably
is.
should do more self-care than I do. I think Facebook groups are very helpful in sharing similar experience with other people. That's been very helpful and then as far as my friends, I have a neighbor that we walk a lot. We walk a lot. And during COVID, we walked a whole lot. And so that's always really helpful to just walk and just talk and, just about whatever. She might not relate because she doesn't have the same, but she listens and I listen to her and to her struggles too. So that's the biggest help, that and Facebook. And then I don't really throw those burdens on all of my friends because I just don't. I just kind of keep them in, which probably isn't the healthiest. But here we are. So yeah, I guess that's what I do. It's probably not the best, but it's what I'm doing.
Well, coping is like that, right? And sometimes it's nice to have friends who don't talk about it, because then you can have new conversations and that helps grounds you too. So don't be so hard on yourself. There, add that to your list of things. Don't be so hard on self. Put a star next to it.
All right.
Christina, how do you all manage? You're muted. Because you also went through
I've
a ton of
listened to-
uncertainty. Yeah.
I went through a ton of uncertainty, frustration. Hospital administrator. I started working in hospitals at 14, worked closely with doctors, and still had to fight to find a diagnosis, get a doctor to listen to me, get a doctor to believe me, and then ultimately find what kind of doctor I needed. So I needed a neuromuscular specialist, but I didn't know those guys existed. So there's, Polly was talking about the management, and there's a lot. I've moved. I had to find new doctors. I had to find new caregivers, navigating through all the new rules, getting insurance in the right lined up. Meanwhile, part of the time I was caring for my parents, who one had dementia and one wound up with a cancer diagnosis. So I'm still trying to navigate my life. My family kind of got pushed to the side while I'm caregiving for my parents. There's a lot of complexity, I think, that goes on. And the way that I cope is I try to stay active. I have to stay active to keep using my muscles, but I try to just stay active, try to stay positive. And I think the thing that really drives me is I know there are a lot of people in much worse situation than I am. So I feel fortunate that I'm not in a wheelchair and having to spend the rest of my life like that. I feel fortunate that I can still walk. It's not pretty sometimes, but I can still walk. So that's what gets me through, is just appreciating what I do have.
How old is your daughter, Christina, who helps you?
She is currently 22. So she was 15 when this all started happening, and she's 22 now.
So this seems like you've taught her and she has learned how to be an advocate for herself. I'm curious, has she also learned some of the self-care that we hope the next generation maybe does a little bit better?
I think so. Because we've had a lot of conversation. She recently, so my condition is CIDP, which I'm not going to say all of it. And so we went to the GBS CIDP symposium and spoke recently, and she shared her side of the story. And some of the things that she talked about was having a much clearer it helped her mature. The experience of, finding me on the ground and realizing that she needed to keep a closer eye on me because, I could not get up when I fell. So she finds me outside, splayed out on the ground, just waiting for somebody to come and pick me up. And she realizes at that point that she has to start paying more attention to what's going on with me. So I think that this experience for her really helped her mature and grow and understand that caregiving. And I get the feeling of that from her still currently. I have another daughter who, when we're walking, will often grab onto my arm just to kind of be there for me in case I get to, a hole in the sidewalk and start to go off balance.
Dear, I know that this touches on so much of both your personal passions for this work and the National Alliance's work. So I just would love to hear what you're thinking as you're listening to everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. I think the one thing that's coming up for me is, the diversity of the caregiver experiences that we see across, racial, ethnic group, age, like health indication, region, etc. And so part of what I wanted to mention earlier before I got sidetracked with the book recommendation was that, one of the biggest, NAC is most known for a report that comes out about every 5 or so years called Caregiving in the US. And the reason I mention it is that it's their flagship study, but also a report that's most widely kind of quoted in terms of what does caregiving look like in the US. And so part of for us at NAC is part of addressing the challenges is really knowing what data, like really having data to bring to policymakers, to bring to elected officials and say, we know that caregivers are doing medical and nursing tasks. We know that, X million of caregivers in the US are under the age of 18. And what are we going to do about it? And so I wanted to make kind of a plug for research, a plug for the caregiving in the US as a data point as we talk about these conversations, because it's at least for us, it's the research behind it, and yes, the personal stories that go with that data that kind of will move the needle along in terms of really helping have better support for the 53 million caregivers that we have in this country. And then a little bit about the advocacy piece. NAC leads the Act on Race campaign, which puts together stakeholders across the caregiver continuum to ensure the implementation of the 2022 National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers. The great news is that we have this strategy that is led by the Administration on Community Living that outlines how we can better support family caregivers. However, we need the work behind it, the accountability, and that takes all of us. And so I really encourage you to check out the Act on Race campaign, where you can join as an individual and as an organization to help us build the infrastructure that we need, and that is reflective and responsive of the different caregiver needs and experiences.
Are there any trends in that caregiving report that either are consistent year after year after year, or that are changing over time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple that I'll mention. The intensity of caregiving, since we have data from since 1997 from 5 different waves, we know that the caregiving is more intense. And what we mean by, we measure that by how many hours caregivers are spending caring for someone. as well as what types of activities they're doing. So the activities of daily living and the instrumental activities of daily living. So things like getting food ready, bathing, going shopping, preparing your meals, etc. And that's increased. We could see a trend upwards. The other thing is an increase of caregivers performing what we would consider medical and nursing tasks. So as science and medicine evolves, we see a huge shift of, if we think about cancer, patients with cancer who have undergone a transplant or are waiting on a transplant, those are the caregivers that are performing pretty complex medical and nursing tasks that previously would have been done by someone in like the health field. And so the added strain of learning how to do all of these things and the anxiety of doing them right, or doing them the way that doesn't jeopardize the health of the person that they're caring for, are two of the ones that I'll highlight for now.
That's a pretty big burden, both, on one hand, I'm sure that there's some benefit to being able to provide care in the home and not take somebody to a doctor's office for something, but then the fear of getting it wrong would be intense. And Crystal, I saw you nodding away. I know you hear about this from your folks. Please speak to it.
Yeah, I was actually sort of reminiscing about a personal experience. And October is, International Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and I went in for my mammogram 7 years ago and came out with a breast cancer diagnosis. And the reason and I'm 7 years cancer free, so thank you to my doctors, my family, and higher powers along the way. But the reason I bring that up is because I was sent home and my husband was expected to do certain types of procedures on me that was just very traumatizing for him and me, to be honest. And it was wonderful to not be in the hospital environment, but it was also sort of, really emotionally impacting, more so because you don't have that confidence and that training. But what I noticed in that process, and here I am now in the patient process point of view, is the level of support, emotional support that we received from our insurance company, reaching out, with a nurse practitioner saying, how are you doing? How is it going? How are you feeling? Right. And there's so much awareness within cancer around meal trains, and have you joined a support group now, and have you been tending to that heart side of this, not just the physical side but the emotional side of the experience. And I feel like in military and veterans caregiving environments, we also have this really strong, really developed awareness that we need to tend to the emotional well-being of the whole family, not just the individual that's going through their experience. And in many cases, we have that in senior care and Alzheimer's and dementia care. So there's a lot of conversation in certain care environments about emotional well-being of the whole family. And that in some of our other medicalized experiences, we just need to bring those best practices over. And I think sometimes it's helpful to just recognize that we have some bright spots in our caregiving support networks. But I think the one thing that really hits me and we talk so many of our community, our community grew from 500 to 5,000 families last year. And this year we've grown from 5,000 to almost 20,000 families. So we're growing very, very fast. And the one thing that we, really always talk to our community about is just remember that your experience is a personal experience, right? Even as a caregiver, you're caring for an individual that is separate from you, that this is their life journey, and your life journey, you have responsibilities to that heart and that body and that mind of that person, but they are separate. And it's okay for you to take back a few moments of every day to tend to your own emotional well-being. It's okay for you to take an extra long, bubble bath at the end of the day, or to ask a neighbor to watch, your loved one so you can go do your own grocery shopping instead of somebody dropping off your groceries for you, or, take that walk like you were talking about, Polly, how important it is. So it's important to keep yourself separate from those around you. You always, it's like you got to fill your own cup first before you can give and give and give to others. And I mean, it's a beautiful expression of human nature and of empathy, is that's what makes us human, is that we do show up, in a very heart-led way for those that we care about. But it's so important to do that for ourselves. So that's kind of a basic tenet, just to remind everybody that's listening and on this panel, that your own emotional well-being, it starts there and then gets pushed out to those around you.
Boy, is that easier said than done?
Always.
I'm
But doesn't
laughing because I take like 6 baths a day.
Yeah.
My husband's like, how many baths do you have to take a day? I'm like, it's my time. Just let me have
It's
it.
my time. I know.
Evan.
You have to fight for it, don't you, sometimes?
Yes, but he can be in the bathroom forever long, but I go in the bath and he gets all mad. I'm like, whatever, dude.
Well, and Polly, you were talking about caregivers doing more increasingly medical stuff, and you started out by talking about the shots you're giving them, right?
Oh yeah. And that when my oldest started when he was 3, and I have a huge needle phobia. I cannot stand the sight of blood. I hate even saying the word, makes me want to vomit. So it is not something I enjoy at all. And I asked, like, is there like a needleless thing we could do here? But that option didn't happen. So yeah, it was very hard. It still is hard, but I'm more used to it now. But yeah, I never in a million years did I think of giving shots to kids every day, or giving shots at all, and dealing with needles every day. But here I am.
And I think it makes it hard too. Like, you want to be the good guy, right? Like, you want to be the nurturer and the soft place to land for any kid in any kind of tough situation, but instead you're the inflictor of
I so am. And my husband, he tried it one time and that did not go well. So he's never tried again. So it always falls on me. And I had my ACL surgeries, and I'm like home that night from surgery. I'm still having to get my kids shots. I'm like, come on, dude, you can do it one night. Like, I'm dying here. But grandma can do it now. Thankfully, she'll help out. But yeah, it's hard when I'm the only one that does it. And yeah, it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And in addition to the shots, are there other things you have to do for the kids?
For that condition, it's mostly shots and pills. My other 2 boys do have another thing that they deal with, and that is, I mean, it's so many days a week in therapies and running around to all of that. So that, yeah, I'm very busy taking to a bunch of different appointments for the boys and dealing with other medicines too for their other condition too. So it's a lot.
So I bet that you sometimes hear, if there's anything I can do, let me know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And
No.
I'm sure that those words have come out of my mouth. They've probably come out of everybody's mouth. But do you now have an answer for that? Like, do you have some tasks that you distribute to other people, or what would be a more helpful question?
I do. The grandparents, they moved from out of state to live about a mile away, and I will help them, and they are so helpful in getting kids to like different appointments. So that has been the biggest blessing, having the grandparents. So I will ask them for help. I don't ask other friends really as much for help on occasion, but usually the grandparents, I'm okay asking them because they like a task to do too, and they like helping out. So that has been a huge help and a huge burden lifted, having them nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Another exciting thing is we're getting a service dog, and I cannot wait to have a little fuzzy helper in our house. So that's going to bring a lot of joy and a lot of help, and we're just thrilled that that's going to be happening for us. So that's one thing I reached out to and we got approved for, and so I'm just thrilled to have that in our toolbox as part of our family.
That's great. Is it a service animal, and then it has a job? Like, does it give the shots? I don't.
I wish. No, it can retrieve medicine.
Mhm.
And then if my kids are overwhelmed, it does deep pressure therapy. It can nudge to help with meltdowns. It will have specific tasks for one child, but it's going to help all the kids.
Mhm.
So, but those are the main ones, are the deep pressure and the nudging, and just kind of taking some of the things that I have to do. The dog can present the clothes to put on, or the dog can do some of the things. And that's going to be a lot better when a dog's coming in all happy with something instead of me, or the dog walking up with the pill bottle instead of me. So, yeah.
Right. Because you're also, as all parents are, preparing your kids for independence
Yep.
in some ways. No. Christina, I know that your family's gone through this sort of forward and back. So what does this all make you think of?
Well, I was just thinking something Crystal said about taking care of yourself, and Polly reinforced it with the baths. Is, I've often said when I was working that the caregivers need to take care of themselves first before they can care for other people. So if caregivers are not taking care of themselves, they can't take care of someone else. So it's real important that caregivers do find that time for themselves to sort of help them be able to get back into it and start the caregiving. I had to do it with my parents, and I'm sure my children have had to do it. I encourage them to take care of themselves. So, and I'm kind of drawing a little bit of a blank on your actual question to me. What was that?
Just to hear what it all made you think of, but a good question came in that I think is related. And I have a knee-jerk answer, but I think that you all are in a better position to answer it. How do you manage the guilt of taking time to care for yourself when you know or feel that there is more you should be doing for your person? Let's talk about guilt.
Well, so I had an experience. My dad was in the hospital at the VA for surgery, and I took some time to care for myself, given that he was in the hospital, and went to see my daughter, who was about 45 minutes away at school, and enjoy a little bit of time with her. And this was all in Louisiana. And when I did finally show up after, visiting with my daughter in the hospital, at that point, that was when my dad was no longer conscious and could no longer really communicate. And so there is a little bit of guilt of, well, maybe if I would have come back a day earlier, we could have had a conversation. And to manage it, I just realized that things happen for a reason, and I just accept that experience happened. But I do think about it often.
Yeah. I wish I could reach through this Zoom and give you a huge hug, Christina. Yeah, because guilt is real, right? We carry it with us everywhere, and we have such a vigilance that develops when you're caregiving, because you're tending to these like immediate moments that are just often life and death moments sometimes, that you sort of overdevelop this idea that you have actually control over everything that's happening. And
Right.
and I think as we're looking like in the moment, but then we look longer about this sort of longer trajectory of sustainable support for someone, that we don't have control over all of those moments, and that if we just step back for a bit and go, okay, I'm in this for this, not only my father, but also my daughter, and also for me, right? You're like pulling back the lens and you're saying, wait a second, like I can't be everything to everyone all the time, despite the movie, which is an amazing So just finding those moments for grace for yourself is so important, because you
Yeah,
are just not, if you're not available to other people in your life and you're not sustaining yourself emotionally and physically, then you're not going to be there for those, that you're caregiving and loving for as well.
We're
yeah,
gonna
it was,
we're gonna lose.
it was my daughter's turn to have my time.
Yeah.
We're
And
gonna
that's
lose
the
you, dear. So I
unfortunate
just wanted
thing
to
of
say
how it
thank
all worked out.
you. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Well, and there we are, right? We have all these different roles, and then we're beholden to ourselves as well. And
Right.
it's a statistic that's been shared quite a bit, but especially in senior caregiving, that often 60% of the time the caregiver passes away before the actual loved one that they're caring for. And part of that is because you deplete yourself in your
Right.
effort to give. And so my heart goes out to you specifically. And then in this broader context, I think what we're saying is that, these are difficult emotions to navigate, and acceptance is a really important part. It's the fifth stage of grief, right? Denial,
Right.
right? Anger, bargaining, um, and then acceptance, depression, and then acceptance. And they've actually added a sixth stage of grief. It's the sixth stage of our Rare Givers emotional journey map, but it's called finding meaning. And I think if you can find the meaning in your own life, if you can figure out what your true north is in your own life, it will help you set the stage as you're navigating through all those other, because it's not linear. We backtrack, we go
Right.
forward, we get angry, we negotiate, we bargain, we get depressed, we accept, we're in this constant give and take in our roles. And so finding the meaning is what I'm witnessing here in each of you, being willing to come and share your perspective and your experiences, and all of those that are online listening, willing to, try to learn, is that we're all just, part of the same human condition, doing the best that we can.
Well, and Crystal, you mentioned something that I think is really the best answer to the guilt, um, which is a voice in our head, right? Is the likelihood of being sick, and the fact that caregiving is so stressful and contributes to heart conditions and diabetes and just emotional wear out, is why you do that. Right? Like even professional race car drivers have to spend a little time in the pit. Why? Because their cars will break and they will lose. So if what you want to do is be around for your person for a long time, you have to have breaks, and you have to have a pit crew, and you have to have replacement parts, and all those, all those silly analogies, is the answer to the guilt. And even, Polly talking about our kids has made me think a lot about those early days of parenting, where you feel like you do everything for your kid and then you snap at them at the end of the day because you're so tired and their feelings are hurt, and that's what they remember. They don't remember you did the dishes and the laundry and called the pediatrician, all that kind of stuff. They remember that you snapped at them and that you were mean to them, and that's not what the caregiving is that they need. And so when we think about what do our people need that we're taking care of, they need somebody with energy and resources and balance, and they need consistent caregiving, and not somebody who has a heart attack halfway through their own condition. So Crystal, thank you so much for the resources on being witness. I think that's huge. And Polly, I think, for you as a parent with kids, it is that constant struggle that you do want to be the soft place for them to land, and you have to do hard work for them all day long that they don't necessarily love.
No, it's overwhelming, but of course I'm going to do it because I love them and I want the best for them. But the snapping thing, it does happen, and I do feel badly about it, but I try to give them extra hugs and read a little more stories to make up for it.
We all do. That not being alone thing is huge.
Yeah.
So I have two sort of last questions, and I'll mush them, and you can answer whatever you want because it's 11:55. So if for people who are on the outer rings of your support network, right? Like maybe I'm your friend. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna give your kids their shots, Polly. But what are some things that your outer rings of support can do for you? Um, and if you had someone coming to you as a, newly on this journey, what advice would you give them as they get started? So I'll start with Polly, but then Christina and Crystal, if you don't mind.
I mean, I think the whole thing of asking for help is big and being willing to do that. And even if it's just asking somebody for a walk, just asking for help to have that time for self-care, just, hey, can you walk with me? Just, or can we go get a coffee? I think that would just be important to just do that. I don't, because nobody else is going to be able to do the medical things that I do, but to just have somebody to just hang out with where I'm not thinking about that all the time or just taking a break from that would be important. I think that would be something to offer to new parents, make sure there is time for you to take these breaks. And it's because you get so focused on getting the pre-approvals and everything, all that medical stuff that nothing else is even there. So I think somebody probably could have told me that and it would have been a good thing. Like, just take a break for you. It's gonna get figured out. You're stressing out isn't gonna make it any better. So just take the time and see if somebody will hang out and get a coffee with you and just be a human and not just this caregiver all the time.
Christina?
So when I was suspecting my condition, before I even had the doctors tell me what they thought it might be, I joined some Facebook support groups where I was asking questions and listening and seeing what other people posted and realizing that I was in a place that I belong, that these were people like me. And over time, as I am, sort of improved in my ability to be a patient, to manage my condition, I started giving back by answering the questions of all the new people that are coming behind me being diagnosed, and found that for me, what is kind of, my true north with all of this is how can I help others navigate the system better? And that's really where I no longer am a hospital administrator in that sense, but at the same time, I'm still a hospital administrator who's helping other patients, who's helping my peers and their caregivers, because I often see caregivers, especially parents saying, my child has this condition and here's my question. And so I'm helping guide those caregivers as well. And that's what kind of keeps me moving forward and staying positive about it all.
That's great. Thank you. Crystal?
Yes, I mean, I can't say enough how important it is to find a coach, and we all seek to be heard in some way. So that coach could be a professional coach, it could be a therapist, it could be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But it could also be just someone in your neighborhood or at your church, or someone that's just there for you, that isn't trying to troubleshoot what is happening with your loved one, or even your own medical experience, but just somebody that is loving and trusted and open to just listening, a really good deep listener. And I might mention the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI.org. Anybody across the country can go to their local NAMI chapter and type in a request and get 12 30-minute free sessions with a really good listener. So not necessarily a psychiatrist or psychologist on the other line, but just a person that's been schooled in how to do deep listening, because you will figure out your own emotional processing if you have just enough time to kind of create some space and think about it. And the catharsis that comes from that is something that will sustain you through all the different stages of your medicalized experience, either as a patient or as a caregiver. So I think that's what I would tell anyone that's new to the journey, is just find someone you can talk to, that's just there for you.
That is awesome. Thank you for bringing us home, Crystal. That was great. And thank you all for taking time to do this. We really appreciate it. And during this Thanksgiving season, we hope everybody gets a little downtime, and, you know, whatever it is that allows you to go back and do the hard work that you're doing. Again, thank you so much. We had a couple of questions I didn't get to, some about policy and protections for caregivers. And I think that that's incredibly important information for people to have. If you have to continue to work and caregive, that is an extraordinary burden. And we'll put that together in a blog with some resources for that too. But no question, these are not easy things for individual families to figure out. So thank you again. And, you know, if we can follow us on social and see our website, and Lauren's got some information there where you can find some more of this information, and we'll also share the resources of these great organizations as well. So thank you, Polly and Christina and Crystal and Yadira, who had to log off early, and just really have a wonderful little season of downtime, I hope.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.